Hey friends, Justin here. Welcome back to my channel. I've got my tea steeping here as I do my quick intro because the tea is hot in today's video, so buckle up for that. But first, before we get into that, I want to send a huge thank you out to my small community, everyone that left such kind messages on my video about my mom. People left anecdotes about their own mothers, and it was so wonderful. Mary Catherine Loves Cats shared me out to her community tab, and when you talk about things that are really personal, it's nice when there's such an outpouring of love and respect. And so I thank you guys for honoring my mother in that way. Now, my story, on the other hand, is much different. So buckle up and let's get into this. Now, this won't be my full story. I'll talk about me at some other time, but I am going to tell you how I became the black sheep of my family. And when I say black sheep, I mean persona non grata, public enemy number one. And some of you may end up agreeing with my family, so this will be fascinating. So just to give you a little bit of background, I was born in a really religious setting and environment. Detroit in the 1980s, there are more churches in Detroit than there are McDonald's, grocery stores. There are some blocks where there's a church on all four corners. So it was a really a focus on religion and traditional family. There also were not a lot of outcomes for black boys at that time. You were either going to play sports, you were going to go to the military, or work at the plant, work in the factory. And all of those things required you to be the tough guy, to be masculine. And it just wasn't the case with me. So I grew up in a house with unconditional love. And, by the time I'm 2 years old, I was this gender non-conforming kid, singing Whitney Houston around the house and quoting I Love Lucy. We loved I Love Lucy in the house. Within the four walls of my home, I was free to be myself. I was free to express myself, and I grew into this campy personality with, all these references and things like that. But I didn't realize outside of those four walls that my personality just did not translate to the rest of my family. They were kind enough because they respected and loved my mother so much. But once she was gone, that illusion, that curtain just went away. So that's kind of the playing field or the background. If you haven't watched my video about my mother, I talk a little bit about how she died and my reaction to it. So go back and check that video out if you haven't watched it already, because it kind of helps with context. So, but when my mom died, I had a nervous breakdown. For about 4 months, I sat on the sofa. Sometimes the TV was on, sometimes it wasn't. I, stared at the wall. For over 4 months, I didn't check the mail. I didn't pay rent. I didn't go to the grocery store. My hygiene was terrible. People would knock on the door and I would just sit and stare forward. It was a true nervous breakdown that I should have been hospitalized for. What was happening around me, though, as I was breaking down, I was needing to speak for my mother, and people were asking me to do things, and if they could have certain mementos of hers, and what are you going to do about this, and how are you going to do that? And I was just ill-equipped, And this is the part that's going to require a little bit of understanding on your side, and you may side with my family. So what ended up happening is that I could not complete the process, meaning I just could not let my mother go. And she's in a cemetery about 50 miles outside of Detroit, as close as a plot as I could find to where her parents were buried, because I wanted them to be together. And the cemetery kept calling me and when are you going to get the headstone and put it down? That's the final step, and I could not bring myself to do the final step. I could not close the chapter on my mother's life, understand that I'm going through a nervous breakdown, and I'm not as rational as I should be, but I felt like I would have died, in those moments if I had taken the final step and finally closed that book. And so I resisted it, and I, ducked the calls, and I just didn't want to see that tombstone, over her grave, because that meant it was over. And my family was unhappy, understandably unhappy and disappointed, and already thinking certain things, weaknesses about my personality, and I was just feeding them all of the ammo that they needed. And so the veil of the respect for, that they were showing me through my mother, that was already gone. And they outwardly, called me names and sissy this and you that, and, if I ever see you this. And over 17 years later, I have not spoken to 95% of my family, and they are absolutely done with me. One of my aunts that I'm close with called me maybe 12 years after my mom died and apologized and reconciled with me, and we've had such a good relationship, and she tells me things about my mom, and it's just a heaven-sent relationship, to hear things that, I wouldn't be able to get information about my mom's life otherwise. But yeah, from that point on, for the next 20 years, or close to it, my family has had absolutely nothing to do with me. If you were to ask them about me, they would say, "Who? We don't know who that is." And so I gave them the perfect excuse to cut off a gay relative. They didn't need much, but my behavior certainly gave them the a good excuse to not only cut me off, but to be violent towards me as well. And for the longest time, I thought I deserved it. I had no self-esteem. I was so disappointed in myself that I couldn't finish that process, that I believed them, that I was terrible, that I was all these things, that I was weak. And, it took me a long time to realize that the price of love that I had for my mother was that terrible, terrible grief, and to accept the boundaries, the prison that it put me in, But it took a long, long time, even to make the video honoring her. Took me a long time to feel comfortable, to feel like I deserved to speak about her. For a long time after she died, I was on drugs and all kinds of things that just to forget. And it certainly didn't help me with dealing with other people. And I was just arguing with people and destroying relationships. And, it took a long, long time. I went out to Los Angeles, I was a punk and was walking down alleys and taking risks and having fun and partying and just trying to get as far away from my life and my circumstance as I could. And my family probably saw that, this guy's partying and trying to live the high life and hasn't taken care of his responsibilities. And so, yeah, that is how I became persona non grata in the McKinnon family. So much so, there were years ago I thought about just changing changing my name and just moving on. But I have had to own my past. You know, you ultimately can't regret. You know, it was the love for my mother that made me hold on to her, you know, for dear life. You know, it wasn't to my benefit, but, you know, just couldn't let her go. So I don't know if this story resonates with anyone else. You know, there's a lot more to it, and I'll probably do a video talking about the life and times of Justin McKinnon, all of the different chapters that I've experienced. But yeah, maybe this resonates with someone. Don't give up. There is life after being cut off by people that never really loved you. You know, you come to the realization that if someone does that they never had your best interest in mind in the first place. And being on my own for so long made me realize I'm strong enough on my own. I can stand on my own. I don't need anybody else. My mother made me strong enough, smart enough, capable enough, that I am that man that I was supposed to be. I'm a homeowner, I'm a landlord, you know, I make a lot of money, I do well for myself, and so we got there. But it took a lot of bumps in the road to get there. So don't give up, you will get there, and you have an opportunity to choose your family. You know, some of the folks on YouTube I consider my family now. And so I thank you guys for showing up for me, for being my community. I'm getting emotional. Yeah, just thank you. And I will talk to you guys in my next video. And thank you again for watching. Bye-bye.